She doesn't belong here. That's what my sister whispered, right before I reached into my purse, pulled out the sealed envelope Grandpa had given me, and read aloud the real will. The entire room went still. Turns out I wasn't just the quiet one at the end of the table. I was the only one Grandpa trusted to carry his legacy. Hi, I'm Emily. I've spent most of my life being overlooked until the day I said nothing and let the truth speak for me. What happened next didn't just change dinner, it changed everything. Before we dive into the story, I'd love to get to know you a little better. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. That way, I can send you a special shout-out. Now, let's begin our story together. I tugged at the sleeve of my blue blouse as I stepped through the back gate. It still fit. The stitching near the hem had frayed a little, but I'd trimmed the loose threads with nail scissors the night before. No holes, no stains, just history. The scent of grilled chicken and buttered corn hit me before I even reached the patio. Hydrangeas framed the yard in their early bloom, their blue petals nearly matching my shirt. A plastic tablecloth flapped in the breeze, already weighed down by potato salad and paper napkins. Lillian spotted me first. "Well," she said loud enough for the whole backyard to hear, "if it isn't my little sister in her signature blouse. Wasn't that from the year Obama was still in office?" A few chuckles followed. My mother looked up from slicing pie and gave me a once-over, her expression somewhere between pity and fatigue. Dad chuckled low. I smiled and nodded, as if it were a compliment. "It's clean, it fits, and it works," I said calmly, brushing a hand across the fabric. "No reason to replace what still does the job." "Sure," Lillian said, reaching for her wine glass, "but it wouldn't kill you to look like you're part of this decade." She wore white linen with a gold belt and matching earrings. Her husband, Mark, stood behind her, silent as usual, nursing a beer and not making eye contact. I doubted he even heard half the things she said anymore. I made my way toward Jacob, her 17-year-old son, who was arranging folding chairs near the porch. He smiled when he saw me. "Hey, Aunt Emily," he said, his voice always softer than the others. "Hey, kiddo." I reached into my canvas bag and pulled out a small, wrapped paperback. "Found this at a used bookstore. It's about game design logic. Thought of you." He turned the book over, his smile widening. "Thanks. I've been meaning to learn more about this stuff." "I know," I said, keeping my voice light. "I listen when you talk." We sat for dinner under dim backyard lights strung from the eaves. As always, Lillian's voice dominated the table. Vacation plans, Jacob's summer goals, her new yoga instructor. I nodded where expected, laughed when prompted, and passed dishes with robotic precision. Mom talked about the dryer groaning again, a sound like a truck stalling in slow motion. "Henry and I think it's finally giving out," she said, stabbing her meatloaf with a fork. "You know how that goes." "I'll take a look at it before I leave," Dad muttered, barely lifting his head. Mom sighed. "Well, it's probably just easier to replace it." "Emily," she added sweetly, "do you think you could help us out a bit? Just a small loan, maybe $200 or so. I'd hate to wait until next month to do laundry." I didn't ask questions. I didn't remind her about the other small loans, the ones that never found their way back. I just nodded and said, "Sure," reaching for my wallet without fuss. She smiled and said something about how kind I was. Kindness, I've found, is often confused with silence. I left early, citing an early morning Zoom call, which no one really believed. As I pulled into my apartment complex later that evening, the quiet settled around me like a thick blanket. I set the leftover casserole on the counter, kicked off my shoes, and opened my laptop. My spreadsheet glowed on the screen. Home savings, target $100,000. Current total, $94,320. Close. So close, I could almost feel the brass key in my hand. I imagined a porch swing, a lemon tree, a mailbox with my name on it. Then I subtracted $200. The total blinked back, $94,120. My phone buzzed on the table. Lillian. I stared at her name for a second before answering. I already knew what was coming. "Hey," she said without pleasantries, "I need a favor. Jacob's trying to get into this summer coding program, and it's perfect for his application portfolio. But it's $800, and the deadline's coming up." I bit the inside of my cheek. "800? It's an investment in his future," she said, like she was reading from a brochure. "You've always said you want what's best for him." I did want what was best for him. Jacob was one of the few reasons I still showed up at these things, and she knew that. "I'll send it tonight," I said. She thanked me quickly and hung up. 800. I added that to the spreadsheet and watched the number shrink again. $93,320. I made a bowl of oatmeal and ate it standing up, phone propped against the sink. I rinsed the spoon, dried it, and placed it back in its usual drawer. That night, as I packed my lunch for the next day, half a turkey sandwich and a bruised apple, I remembered something Grandpa once told me on a rainy afternoon. I had just shown him a receipt for a small grant I'd won at work. He looked at me and said, "Keep your receipts and your silence. Both might save you someday." Just as I turned off the kitchen light, my phone buzzed again. "Mom, big news about Jacob. We're celebrating next Sunday. You'll be there, right?" I stared at the message. No question mark, just the expectation of my presence. And maybe my wallet. The house smelled like buttered rolls and lemon furniture polish, warm, familiar, and just a little too rehearsed. I walked in with a bottle of sparkling cider tucked under one arm and a handwritten card for Jacob in the other. Mom greeted me with a practiced smile, cheeks flushed, apron dusted with flour. "You're just in time," she said, ushering me toward the dining room. "Everything's almost ready." I set the cider on the sideboard and glanced around. The AC hummed above us, fighting back the early summer heat that clung to the windows. The long table was already set, cloth napkins folded like sails, silverware polished to a shine. At the far end, above the buffet cabinet, Grandpa Ed's portrait stared out in soft sepia tones. His eyes looked proud, or maybe just tired. Lillian breezed in next, hair pulled back into a glossy bun, heels clicking against the hardwood. She was carrying a sleek folder, heavy with color printouts. "Creswell," she announced, laying the folder down beside the centerpiece like it was a wedding invitation. "Full program overview, tuition, housing, orientation dates." Mark followed, slightly out of breath. He rubbed his palms together and said, "This is big." Jacob got in. The room shifted slightly. Chairs scraped. Mom clapped her hands. Dad muttered something about good stock. Everyone looked to Jacob, who stood beside the kitchen door, half smiling with his hands in his pockets. "That's incredible," I said genuinely. "Creswell's tough to get into." Jacob nodded. "Computer science." I stepped forward and handed him the card. "Just a little note. I'm proud of you." He looked at it like it was a rare artifact. "Thanks, Aunt Emily." We all sat. Roast chicken was passed around. Coleslaw, corn pudding, sweet tea sloshed into mason jars. For a while, the conversation stayed on safe ground. Creswell's orientation dates, dorm layout, the fact that Lillian knew someone on the alumni board. Then dessert arrived. Peach cobbler, steaming under a crust of cinnamon sugar, slid onto plates. Just as forks hit porcelain, Mom cleared her throat. "We've been thinking," she said, her voice light. Too light. My fork hovered. "Creswell is... It's not cheap," Lillian jumped in, "but it's worth it. It's what Jacob's been working toward." Mark leaned in. 50,000 a year. Roughly, I nodded slowly, still chewing. "That's substantial." "We've all been talking," Mom continued, folding her napkin carefully. "You've been so good with money, Emily, so disciplined, and you don't have anyone else depending on you." I swallowed. "You're not married, no kids," Lillian added. "No mortgage, no car payments. So we thought..." I looked around the table. No one was meeting my eyes, except Jacob, who looked like he wanted to disappear into his tea. "You'd be in a position," Mark said, "to cover the first couple of years, just to get him started." I set my fork down. The sound it made on the plate was sharper than I intended. Claire offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You don't even need all that to buy a house these days." I stared at her. "How would you know what I need?" I asked, my voice calm but steady. Lillian shrugged. "We've seen the listings. You could get a nice place for way less than $100,000 around here." "And you've seen—" "What exactly?" That's when it landed. The pause. The glance between Claire and Lillian. The brief, embarrassed nod from Mark. They'd been in my finances. "Your father helped with the taxes a while back," Mom said, her tone defensive now. "It wasn't spying. We just noticed the number and—" "You noticed the number," I repeated, "and decided it wasn't really mine anymore." Jacob opened his mouth but said nothing. I took a slow breath. "I've been saving for 5 years, packing lunches, skipping vacations, wearing the same clothes you mock me for. I've lived small so I could eventually live freely." Dad finally spoke. "No one's trying to take that from you." "No?" I looked at each of them in turn. "Because it sounds like you already counted it." A silence spread like spilled milk, slow, sticky, hard to clean up. "I'm not paying Jacob's tuition," I said. Mark shifted. "We just thought—" "I know what you thought, but this is mine. I worked for it, alone." Jacob stood then, awkwardly. "It's okay. Don't worry about it." Lillian reached for his arm. "Jacob, sit." He didn't. I picked up my napkin, folded it gently, and placed it on the table. "Well," I said, "congratulations, Jacob. Truly. I hope Creswell is everything you want it to be." I grabbed my purse from the back of the chair. As I made my way toward the front hall, I passed the study door. It was cracked open slightly, and through the gap I caught a sliver of the room. Old books, a brass lamp, dust motes floating in the golden light, and on the side table, Grandpa's key bowl still sat. My keychain jingled in my hand as I reached for the doorknob. One key in particular brushed against my palm, a small, worn bronze one with a ridged edge. I'd almost forgotten it was there. Almost. The piano played something soft and familiar as I stepped into the dining room, though I couldn't quite place the melody at first. Later, I realized it was a slow, instrumental version of "What a Wonderful World." I stood still for a second just inside the doorway, taking it in. White tablecloths, name cards and calligraphy, candles already flickering in crystal holders. My seat, of course, was at the far end of the table, near the kitchen door, near the draft from the hallway vent. I took it without comment. Lillian was in full hostess mode, floating between guests in her high-neck navy dress, cheeks glowing with the kind of confidence that always made me feel smaller than I was. Claire wore pearls. Dad had put on his old sport coat. Even the iced tea came in real glasses tonight. Jacob sat next to Grandpa's church friend, Mr. Caldwell, who asked him about college plans between bites of salad. Aunt Vivian leaned in toward Uncle Raymond, murmuring something that made them both smile. Everything looked perfect, until it didn't. Lillian tapped her spoon against her glass. Not too loudly, just enough to silence the hum of conversation. She stood. "I'd like to make a quick toast," she said, raising her wine glass, "to Jacob, our star, our future, the first of the next generation to carry the Wallace name into something bigger than any of us could have imagined." A round of polite applause followed. Jacob smiled modestly and nodded. "And to the family who stepped up to make it happen," she added, letting her eyes skim the table without ever landing on me. My mother chimed in right on cue. "We wish all our daughters understood what it means to make sacrifices." That one landed. Not subtle, not even trying to be. I kept my hands in my lap. Mark chuckled and added, "Well, at least Jacob has us." That's when I pushed back my chair. The sound scraped across the hardwood like a warning. I stood slowly, cleared my throat just once. "I'd like to say something, if I may," I said, keeping my voice even. Lillian blinked. "Oh?" she asked, the corners of her mouth twitching. I reached into my purse, fingers finding the familiar crease of old paper. My thumb pressed against the seal. Grandpa's envelope. I had kept it untouched for over a year, carried it between apartments, hid it in the back of a filing cabinet, wondered whether I'd ever actually open it. He gave it to me on a rainy afternoon, one of those slow Sundays when he used to play chess with himself, and let me read on the couch nearby. "Only use this when silence isn't enough," he had said, pressing it into my hand without explanation. I broke the seal now. "This," I said, "is Grandpa's will. The original, not the one he had notarized for the bank, the one he wrote himself, by hand, when he knew the others wouldn't listen." Mark scoffed. "What are you talking about?" I opened the pages. His handwriting was still strong, still exacting in its shape. "I, Edward M. Wallace," I read aloud, "declare this to be my final personal will and testament, outside of legal trusts already filed. I name my granddaughter, Emily, as sole trustee and executor of my legacy estate, including, but not limited to, all personal savings, family memorabilia, and rights to direct any charitable giving in my name." Dear friend, what would you do if you were in my shoes? I bet you can't guess what's coming next. But before we go any further, drop a 5 in the comments if you're still with me, because what happens next might just leave you speechless. The room didn't fall silent. It froze. No forks, no glasses. Even the air stopped moving for a beat. I looked up slowly. "If anyone would like to question its authenticity," I said, folding the paper carefully, "Grandpa's lawyer has the original on file, notarized, digitally time-stamped." Signed. Lillian's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Claire shifted in her seat. "Why would he do that?" Mr. Caldwell took off his glasses and set them down beside his plate. Jacob stared at me like I'd just spoken another language. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't explain further, because I didn't have to. Across the table, Aunt Vivian dropped her fork. It clattered against the china with a loud, almost rude finality. Her husband put a hand on her wrist, but she didn't react. Jacob looked from his mother to his father, then back to me. Then Mark leaned forward. His face flushed. "That can't be real," he said. I met his eyes and held them. "Then by all means," I replied, "call the lawyer." He didn't. And for the first time in a very long time, nobody asked me to leave. Nobody asked me to stay either. "You forged that will, didn't you?" Lillian's voice trembled, not with anger, but with fear. The kind of fear that creeps in when the story you've told for years begins to crack. I didn't answer right away. The cicadas outside had grown louder now that the dining room was nearly empty, their chorus buzzing just behind the clink of dessert plates and the muted hum of air vents. A few guests stood near the hallway pretending to check their phones. Others quietly slipped out, murmuring polite goodbyes that barely reached our ears. "I said," Lillian repeated, stepping closer, "you forged it." I looked at her, not harshly, not even with pity, just long enough for her to realize that I didn't need to defend myself. "It's real," I said calmly. "Grandpa's lawyer has the original. You can call him in the morning." Claire stood, her napkin balled in her fist. "He wasn't well those last few months. He was sentimental, cloudy. You know how he got when he was tired." "He signed it 2 years before he passed," I replied, "back when he was still driving himself to church, still beating Jacob at chess." Mark raised his voice then. "This is unbelievable. You don't even talk to the family. You show up twice a year in that blouse, barely say anything, and suddenly you're the heir to everything?" Henry, who had been silent the whole evening, finally lifted his gaze from his plate. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise. "Why would he pick you over your sister?" I thought about answering that. Thought about listing the years I'd spent visiting Grandpa while everyone else made excuses. The grocery runs, the quiet afternoons helping him sort papers, the books we passed back and forth, the jokes no one else seemed to understand. But instead, I let the question hang there, let it answer itself. Jacob stepped forward. He looked pale under the porch light, his hands shoved into the pockets of his blazer. I didn't know, he said quietly, eyes fixed on the floor. I'm sorry. He meant it. I could hear it in his voice, and for that moment it was enough. You have nothing to apologize for, I said. Claire began to cry, soft at first, then louder, the kind of crying that wants a witness. I did everything I could for this family, she said. You think I wanted it to be like this? That I enjoy asking you for help? Lillian put an arm around her. Mark stood behind them, arms crossed, lips pressed into a thin line. They looked like a united front, but I could see the cracks. Emily, Henry said, you're not being fair. I almost laughed. Fair. The word rang in my ears like a bad joke. 5 years of scraping by, of saying no to myself so they could say yes without pause, and now I wasn't being fair? I'm done, I said. It came out softly, like an exhale. No speech, no explanation, just done. I walked to the entryway, picked up my purse, and stepped out into the night. The air was thick with humidity, the porch light buzzing faintly. Cicadas shrilled from the trees, and cars lined the curb like silent witnesses. Jacob followed me to the steps. I really didn't know, he said again. I turned to him. I believe you. He hesitated. Do you still want to come to my orientation in August? That almost broke me, but I shook my head gently. Let's talk later, okay? He nodded, then slipped back inside, letting the screen door fall closed behind him. I walked toward my car, heels clicking softly on the walkway. When I reached the driver's seat, I pulled out my phone. The screen lit up with the family group chat. 12 unread messages. I didn't open them. I didn't scroll. I didn't answer. I pressed and held until the red bubble popped up. Delete conversation? I tapped yes. No noise, no sparks. Just a quiet removal, like dusting off a shelf. By the time I got back to my apartment, it was nearly 11. The parking lot was mostly empty. Upstairs, I slipped off my shoes, set down my bag, and changed into an old t-shirt. I made tea I didn't drink, watered the one plant I hadn't managed to kill, sat on the couch in the dark, the soft hum of the fridge filling the room like company. Then I remembered the voicemail. I scrolled through my old messages until I found it. Grandpa, his voice clear, recorded on some long-forgotten Tuesday. They'll question you, he had said, because they can't control you. But if you've done your part, you don't need to answer to them. He paused, then added, don't forget, your life is yours. That's what I loved most about you. I sat with that for a while. Then I opened my laptop. New email. Subject line. House hunt. Message. Hi, Janet. I'm ready to start looking. My budget is firm. Let's talk. I hit send. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty for wanting something of my own. The first time I turned the key, the only sound was the screen door groaning open. It echoed across the empty living room like a greeting, like the house had been waiting on me. The porch creaked beneath my feet as I stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of lemon and old pine, the kind of scent you get from a mop and a stubborn sense of hope. Afternoon sun poured through the front window, catching the dust I hadn't had time to clean yet. The place was quiet, mine, and mine alone. Weeks earlier, I had toured at least 6 different houses. One had new floors but backed into a busy road. Another smelled like mildew beneath its fresh coat of paint. A third had great light, but a roof that would need replacing by spring. None of them felt like somewhere I could breathe. Then Janet called. I think I found it, she said. It's not flashy, but it's got good bones, and the porch swing reminded me of you. I didn't ask why. I just scheduled the showing. The cottage sat on a sleepy street not far from the river, with chipped shutters and ivy creeping across one side. The grass had grown long and wild, but something about it felt honest. When I stepped inside, I didn't think about price per square foot or renovation timelines. I thought about Grandpa. I thought about quiet mornings. The seller accepted my offer 2 days later. I signed the paperwork in a strip mall office with beige walls and a receptionist who offered me a cup of weak coffee in a styrofoam cup. Janet sat beside me, flipping pages like a patient aunt at a high school graduation. "You're doing this," she said as I signed the final line. "I guess I am." "No backing out now." I smiled. "Good." Moving day came with the brisk air of late fall and a few co-workers who offered their Saturday in exchange for pizza and cold sodas. My furniture was minimal: an old love seat, a chipped dresser, 2 folding chairs, and a table I'd used as a desk since college. The biggest item was a twin bed frame, which I'd finally replaced with a full-size mattress after years of telling myself I didn't need one. The house didn't mind the hand-me-downs. It welcomed them. I swept every floor twice, washed every windowsill, lined the kitchen drawers with contact paper, and folded tea towels like they were worth showing off. When I visited the hardware store to pick out blinds, I accidentally called the young man behind the counter, "Sir." He looked surprised, then grinned. "Ma'am, I work here part-time. You don't have to be that polite." I laughed. Old habit. The garden bed near the porch was mostly weeds and cracked soil, but I knelt beside it anyway, pulling what I could, pressing rosemary sprigs into the dirt. I didn't expect anything to grow right away. Still, the act itself felt necessary. One evening, I found a scrap of paper tucked inside one of Grandpa's books I'd kept. His handwriting, slanted and sure. "Ownership is peace. Don't let anyone rent your peace." I pinned it to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a tomato. Later that night, I brewed peppermint tea and brought it to the front porch. I sat barefoot on the swing, watching the light from the kitchen spill across the steps. A neighbor walked by with a dog, waved without asking questions. No one knew how much money I had. No one expected me to sacrifice anything. No one could come in unless I opened the door. And that, in itself, was a kind of freedom I didn't know I'd been missing. My phone buzzed on the railing beside me. A voicemail. Unknown number. I pressed play. "Hi, Aunt Emily. It's Jacob. I was hoping we could talk." I used to dream about owning a house, not the kind with a grand staircase or marble countertops, just something solid, something still. But I never imagined it would feel like reclaiming my name. The string lights had been up since morning, swaying gently in the breeze. I'd arranged folding chairs in small groups, placed mason jars filled with lemonade on the crate I was using as a drink table, and stacked store-bought cookies on a ceramic platter like they were homemade. A hand-lettered sign leaned against the fence. "Welcome," written not to impress, just to invite. It was a clear Saturday afternoon in early spring. The garden beds were starting to show life. Tiny shoots of basil, sprigs of mint, even a brave little marigold. I'd spent the past few weekends working on them with borrowed tools and borrowed patience, reminding myself that growth was rarely instant, but always worth the wait. People trickled in slowly. Janet arrived first, holding a bundle of daffodils and a bottle of peach iced tea. She hugged me like an old friend, then immediately began rearranging chairs and plumping throw pillows I hadn't noticed were sagging. 2 co-workers from the marketing firm showed up next, bringing a rosemary plant in a clay pot and a card that simply read, "Thank you for making space for all of us." A neighbor I barely knew dropped by with his dog, offered a smile and a nod, and left a tray of brownies with a sticky note that read, "From the blue house on the corner, no one asked about my family. No one brought up last summer. It was perfect." As the sun dipped low and the lights began to glow a little brighter against the dusk, I stepped inside to refill the lemonade pitcher. When I came back out, Jacob was standing near the back gate, a small potted fig tree cradled in his arms. We hadn't seen each other since the voicemail. "Hey," he said, half smiling. "Hey," I said, setting down the pitcher. He looked older, or maybe just steadier. "I wasn't sure if I should come," he said. "I'm glad you did." He handed me the tree. "It's not much, but it's something." I took it gently, feeling the weight of the soil, the curve of the tiny trunk. "It's everything," I said. We sat on the back steps, just far enough from the rest of the gathering to hear the laughter without being in the middle of it. I didn't end up going to Creswell, Jacob said after a pause. Too much pressure, too expensive. I'm at State now, got a partial scholarship. I work part-time at the campus help desk. He looked down at his hands. I think I'm doing okay. You are, I said. You really are. He was quiet for a beat, then added, What you did? Walking away. Standing up for yourself. It helped. More than you know. I nodded, blinking faster than I meant to. It wasn't about walking away from anyone, I said. It was about walking towards something better. We didn't talk about Lillian, or Claire, or anything that might pull the air between us too tight. We just sat. The fig tree rested at my feet. When he stood to leave, I gave him a hug. Not to forgive anyone, just to honor who he was becoming. As the sky darkened into that soft indigo blue that makes everything feel softer, Janet came and sat beside me. She handed me a cookie and nudged my arm. You ever think about writing your own story? She asked, her voice light. I looked out at the tiny lights, the blooming herbs, the fig tree waiting to be planted. I think, I said, I just did. As the string lights flickered gently above my porch and the last guest waved goodbye, I stood among the garden beds and felt something rare settle inside me. Peace, the kind no one could take. In one of Grandpa's old notes, he wrote, "What you water grows." I used to think he meant plants, but now I know he meant self-worth, boundaries, and quiet strength. Sometimes we don't get the apology we deserve, but we can still build a life that no longer needs it. And in that space, forgiveness becomes a garden we grow for ourselves, not for those who never learned how to tend it. If this story spoke to something in your heart, I invite you to share your thoughts, or a memory that shaped your own idea of home. I'd love to hear it.